Welcome back to the Land Matters podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Flynn. Here at the Lincoln Institute, we're ramping up our work on affordable housing. And across the country, the affordability crisis is only intensifying. The average American tenant is rent burdened, that is, paying more than 30% of their income on housing, in many cases, much more than that, according to a recent report by Moody's. Home prices fluctuate by region, but from San Francisco to Boston, it's a similar story. It's nearly impossible for so many to live close to work, retire in the community of choice, or buy a home for the first time. Our guest on this episode of Land Matters is someone who knows about affordability as the mayor of a legacy city that is in transition and on an upward trajectory. Aftab Purval is mayor of Cincinnati, Ohio, and indeed is making some history as Cincinnati's first Asian American mayor. He was raised in Southwest Ohio, the son of first-generation Americans. He has the reputation of being something of a go-getter. He worked at a toy store when he was in middle school, served for a time as counsel at Procter & Gamble, and then went into public service, serving as Hamilton County Clerk of Courts from 2016 to 2021, and was the first Democrat to hold that office in over 100 years. He graduated from the Ohio State University and the University of Cincinnati Law School. He resides in Clifton with his wife and two sons, and as became quite evident very recently, is a big-time Cincinnati Bengals fan. Mayor Purval, right. Welcome to the Land Matters podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Anthony, it's really wonderful to be here talking about my favorite subject, which is housing and housing affordability. Thrilled to be here.
Well, you've attracted quite a lot of attention for what some have called a heroic undertaking to preserve the city's single-family housing stock and make it available for purchase by local families. And importantly, out of the hands of outside investors, of those institutional investors we've been hearing about that are buying up properties in legacy cities and elsewhere, either to flip them or more typically rent them out at high profits. Briefly, walk us through what was accomplished in coordination with the Port of Cincinnati and where the housing is, what neighborhoods they're in, and what's the update since the purchase.
Well, thanks for setting that stage. Just to provide a little more context, Cincinnati is a legacy city. We have a proud, long tradition here of being the final destination from the Underground Railroad. We were the doorstep to freedom for so many slaves who were escaping that horrific experience. We have, a lot of historic neighborhoods, a lot of historic buildings. And we have a lot of aging infrastructure and aging single-family homes, which paired with the fact that we are an incredibly affordable city on the national context, makes us a prime target for institutional investors. Unfortunately, Cincinnati is on national list after national list about the rate of increase for our rents. And it's primarily being driven by these out-of-town institutional investors who have no interest, frankly, in the well-being of Cincinnati or their tenants, buying up cheap single-family homes, not doing anything to invest in them, but overnight doubling or tripling the rents, which is pricing out a lot of our communities, particularly our vulnerable, impoverished communities. So the city is doing a lot of things through litigation, through code enforcement. In fact, we just sued two of our largest institutional investors, most recently Vinebrook and the owners of Williamsburg, in order to let them know that we're not playing around. If you are going to prey, if you're going to exercise predatory behavior in our community, we're not going to stand for it, and we're coming after you. But we've also done things on the front end to prevent this from happening by partnering with the port. Obviously, your listeners are probably very well informed, but the port has development tools and real estate tools that cities and municipalities don't have. Specifically, that they don't have to pay tax on the properties that come under their ownership through the land bank. So when several of our single-family home properties went up for sale because an institutional investor put them on the selling block, the port spent $14.5 million to buy over 190 single-family homes, outbidding 13 other institutional investors. Those homes are spread out through the entire city of Cincinnati, all of our 52 neighborhoods, but obviously a lot of them are concentrated in communities of poverty. Over the past year, our port has been working with small business owners and SBEs to bring those properties into compliance with our code, dealing with the various code violations that the institutional investor left behind, pairing these single-family homes once they're fixed up with qualified home buyers, oftentimes folks who are working in poverty or lower middle class who've never owned a home before. And just this year, we're making 3 of those 194 available for sale. So it's a huge success across the board. It ticks a lot of boxes, but it's just one tool that the port and the city is working on to increase affordability of housing in all of our neighborhoods.
So what did you learn from this exercise that might be transferable to other cities? I mean, it takes a lot of capital to do this, to outbid a institutional investor. So are those funds that cities should look around for, or what would you say would be some of the lessons that you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, it does require a lot of funds. And that's why we need more flexibility from both the federal government and from the state government to provide municipalities with the tools to prevent this from happening in the first place. Now, once an institutional investor gets their claws into a community, there's very little that the city can do to enforce or hold them accountable. The better strategy, as we've seen this time, is to, on the front end, buy up properties. And so, a lot of cities have a lot of dollars from the federal government through ARP. We have used a lot of ARP dollars, not just to get money into the hands of people who need it most, which is critically important in this time, in this pseudo post-pandemic time, but also using the dollars creatively to partner with other, private public partnerships or the port to give them the resources necessary to buy up the land and hold them. That has been part of our strategy with ARP. This is a unique time in cities where they have more flexibility about the resources coming from the federal government. And I would encourage any mayor, any council to really think critically about using the funds, not just in the short term, but also in the long term to address some of these macroeconomic forces.
Part of this, if we think about an increase in housing prices and these efforts to maintain affordability, that it ties back to Cincinnati being a more popular place to live. The population has increased slightly after years of decline. So, do you consider Cincinnati a pandemic or climate haven? I'm sure you saw the Moody's report on best and worst cities in terms of climate change and resilience, and Cincinnati scored in the top 10. That is least impacted by heat, drought, and sea level rise. What are the implications of that population growth if you're really going to continue to see that?
It's an important question. And what I love about my job as mayor is my focus isn't necessarily on the next 2 or 4 years, but the next 100 years. And right now we are living through in real time a paradigm shift that was catalyzed because of the pandemic. The way we live, work, and play is just completely changing. Remote work is just completely altering our economic and lifestyle throughout the entire country, but particularly here in the Midwest. And what I am convinced of, due to this paradigm shift, is because of climate change, because of the rising cost of living on the coast, there will be an inward migration. I don't know if it's in the next 50 or 75 years, but it will happen. And it's not just rhetoric, Anthony. We're already seeing large businesses making decisions based on climate change. Just 2 hours north of Cincinnati, Intel is making a $200 billion investment to create the largest semiconductor plant in the country. 2 of the reasons they chose just north of Cincinnati is, number one, it's access to fresh water, the Ohio River in the south and the Great Lakes in the north. And number 2, our region's climate resiliency. Now, don't get me wrong, we're all affected by climate change. We're not all affected equally. Our impoverished and disadvantaged communities are more affected disproportionately than others. But in Ohio, in Cincinnati, we're not seeing the wildfires, the droughts, the hurricanes, the earthquakes, the coastal erosion that we're seeing on the coast and other parts of the country, which makes us a climate change safe haven, not just for business investment, but also for people. And so Cincinnati is partly growing because our economy is on fire right now, but we're going to really see, I believe, exponential growth over the next few decades because of these massive factors pushing people into the middle of the country. So the investments that we make right now to help our legacy communities and legacy residents stay in their home and continue to make Cincinnati an affordable place for them, while also keeping in mind these future residents are going to come in, is a really challenging topic, because while Cincinnati right now is very affordable in the national context, it's not affordable for all Cincinnati residents because our housing supply has not kept up with the amount of population growth, and because our incomes have not kept up with housing prices. So in order to make sure that the investments in the future and the population growth in the future does not displace our current residents, we've got to stabilize our market now and be prepared for that growth.
So what are the land use changes and transportation improvements, the city building, if you will, that you're concentrating on accordingly? What are the most important or big redevelopment sites, and how is the city being reconfigured, if it is?
Yeah, I mean, the most oftentimes people ask mayors about their legacy, and the third rail of local politics is zoning. If we are going to get this right, then we have to have a comprehensive review and reform of our land use policies. And when I talk about legacy, that's what I'm talking about. We have for over a year now been having meetings with stakeholders to almost have a visioning exercise about what kind of neighborhoods do we want to encourage in our city. What does a modern Cincinnati look like? I believe it looks like a dense, diverse neighborhood that's walkable with good public transportation and investments in public art. And right now, the city of Cincinnati's zoning is not encouraging those kinds of neighborhoods. More than 50% of our city, close to 70% of our city, is zoned for single family use exclusively, which is putting an artificial cap on the amount of supply that we can create, which is artificially increasing rents and artificially increasing property taxes, which is causing a lot of our legacy residents who even own their home to be displaced. If we're serious about deconcentrating poverty and desegregating our city, then we've got to take a look at multifamily unit prohibitions. We've got to take a look at parking requirements for both businesses and homes. We've got to look at transit-oriented development along our bus rapid transit lines. We've got to look at creative opportunities to create more housing, like auxiliary dwelling units. But none of this is easy. It's not easy because NIMBYism is real, and we've got to convince people that I'm not going to put a 20-floor condo building on your residential cul-de-sac. But it's also challenging because of our, particularly here in the Midwest, our slavish devotion to cars. Look, cars are important, and until we can make the investments necessary to have public transportation that is better than the commute you would have with your car, we're not going to get there. But if we can make concurrent and parallel investments in our public transportation, and at the same time, not get rid of all cars and all parking, but say very clearly, parking is important, but it's not the only important thing, then if we're on that path together iteratively, we can create a modern Cincinnati. Now, again, I can't overstate how hard this is. Zoning is very, very difficult because change is very difficult, and people are afraid of what that will turn the city into. That's why we've been doing a year-long worth of community engagement, and I am confident we can make some substantive changes to our zoning code to encourage more affordability, encourage more public transportation, and just be a greener city. And on that, let me just end there. because it touches on the previous answer. Cincinnati is already an industry leader, not just for climate resiliency, but for climate investment. We have made a commitment that all of our city vehicles, we will only buy city vehicles that are electric vehicles when they become available. We have already the largest city-led solar farm in the entire country, which is significantly contributing to our energy consumption. So in many ways, we're already on our front foot to accomplish these really lofty goals.
Well, I want to come back to climate finally, but before that, it just occurred to me that a little bit of this is sort of like back to the future, right? Because the city had streetcars, did it not? Do you have the sense that there's an appreciation for that those times, actually made the city function better?
Yeah, I mean, look, when I paint this picture for people, Anthony, you're exactly right. The city used to be dense, used to have incredible streetcars, public transportation. And then unfortunately, cities, not just in Cincinnati, but across the country, saw a steady decline of population, losing folks to the suburbs. Now people want to come back into the city but now we have the hard work of undoing what a lot of cities tried to do, which was create suburban neighborhoods within a city to attract those suburban people back, right? So it's a little bit undoing the past while also focusing on what used to exist. And when I share with people this vision, they say, yeah, that's a no-brainer. Of course I want to do that. But they don't want to do it on their street, right? And so having this intentional conversation about why this is good for everybody. Everybody's going to say they want a desegregated city. Everyone's going to say they want deconcentrations of poverty. Everyone's going to say Black Lives Matter. When you get down to the policy changes that are necessary, that's when it becomes very, very difficult.
Just picking up on that, you've touched on this, but it's a singular situation for a legacy city. If the city really is in this kind of transition, what worries you most, and what do you identify as the major issues facing lower income and communities of color in Cincinnati?
Displacement. If we cannot be a city that our current residents can afford, they will leave, which hurts everything. I mean, if the city is not growing, then a city our size, where we're located in the country, we are dying, and we are dying quickly. Cities our size have to grow. And in order to grow, not only do we need to recruit talent to come to us, be a destination, but we have to preserve the families and the legacy communities that have been here in the first place. And no city in the country has figured out a way to grow without displacing. I mean, it is the market factors, the economic factors are so profound and so hard to influence, and the city's resources are so limited. It's really, really difficult. So getting back to our institutional investor problem, the city doesn't have the resources to just go up and buy property and make sure that we're selling to good faith owners, right? If we had that power, that market influence, we would do it. So oftentimes, I guess I get frustrated that I don't have enough resources, enough authority to make a meaningful impact on the macroeconomic forces that are coming into the city. Because if we get our dream, which is more investment, more growth, that comes with negative consequences, and it's really difficult to manage both.
And finally, back to climate change, the mayor's website says Cincinnati is well positioned to be a leader in climate change at home and abroad. You touched on this with electric vehicles and the solar power, but I'd like to know what do you think the city has to offer that's distinctive in terms of climate action?
Well, I mean, all of our policy initiatives that come to the city are looked at through two lenses. The first is racial equity, and the second is climate. So everything that we do, whether it's our urban forestry assessment, looking at a heat map of our city, and investing in trees to not just clean the air, but also cool our neighborhoods, whether it's our investments in biochar, which I'm a big biochar guy. Not a lot of people know about biochar, but we are only one of only 3 cities in the entire world, not just the country, the world, that received a huge grant from the Bloomberg Philanthropies to continue to innovate in the world of biochar, which is a byproduct of burning wood, which is an incredible carbon magnet that helps with stormwater runoff, but also pulls carbon out of the air. Our Parks Department, which is one of the best in the country, continues to innovate on that front, preserving the Ohio River. We just had a environmental and human disaster in East Palestine, upstream in the Ohio River. So continuing to have some of the best testing and best preservation in the country for our water supply will continue to be important. But ultimately, businesses and people who are looking to the future consider climate change in that future. And if you're looking for a city that is both climate resilient, but also making massive investments on climate technology, then Cincinnati is that destination for you.
Well, Mayor Aftab, as I understand you sometimes like to be known, thank you for this conversation on the Land Matters podcast.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Have a great day.
By the way, an edited version of this interview will appear in print and online as part of the Mayor's Desk series, our interviews with innovative chief executives of cities from around the world. That will be in Landlines magazine, and for that, you just go to our website, lincolninst.edu. That's also where you'll find our work on affordable housing under the heading of reduced poverty and spatial inequality, and also information on our many initiatives and collaborations with post-industrial legacy cities. And that is it for this episode of the Land Matters podcast. We hope you'll rate, share, and subscribe to Land Matters so you never miss a show. And you can also follow the Lincoln Institute on Twitter. The handle is @LandPolicy. Until next time, I'm your host, Anthony Flint. Thanks for listening.